Today I'm bringing you a tutorial for making a chapstick holder. This is a quick and easy gift to sew, perfect for a beginner sewist. I'm going to be sewing these with my grandchildren later in the month so that they can give them as teacher gifts and gifts for their friends. It takes very little fabric, quick and easy to sew. I'm going to leave all the dimensions, cutting instructions, and materials in the description box below, and I will be adding chapters so you can easily skip around in the video. It's perfect for customizing for different tastes. I have one in this Pokemon fabric, which is perfect for the 6-year-old crowd. So let's get sewing. I have all of my materials cut out and ready to go, and I'm using just what I have on hand. So I've cut out my quilting cotton as 5 inches by 9 inches, and I've cut out my interfacing a little bit shy of that. This is Pellon Shape Flex SF 101. I like to use it in bag making, and I think it has a really nice body. This I've cut out a tiny bit smaller. You don't have to be super precise in your cutting of the interfacing. By cutting it a little smaller, it reduces the bulk and the seam allowance. This particular case, I had a scrap of interfaced fabric that was a little bigger than this. I cut it to size so it was fully interfaced, and it worked just fine for the purpose. You're also going to need a scrap of quilting cotton, 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, and a 2-inch by 2-inch square of the SF 101. And you're also going to need some type of closure. I like to use the cam snaps because I have them, and I've got a lot of fun colors, so it's nice to coordinate with my fabric. I'm using the hand press this time. I've got my chapstick ready to load, and I've got a variety of swivel clips. The size that you make your tab that you're going to thread through the swivel clip, this is the tab, will depend on the size of your swivel clip. This one is a little beefier than what I need, but I'm going to use this because I think the grandchildren will really like the colors for themselves and also for gifting to their friends or to anyone they choose to make it for. And I have a lot of these on hand, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. This would have been absolutely fine. It's not as heavy duty. It's a little trigger clip. It'll clip to a backpack fine. This is 3/4 inch, as is this. I do have a swivel clasp that is 1/2 inch, which is probably a more appropriate size for this small case. But like I said, the grandchildren will like this. That's why I chose to go with this. For my prototype, I did a 2 by 2 inch tab, and I thought I could stand something a little beefier, so I increased my square to 2.5 inches. So the first thing we're going to do after we cut everything out is we're going to head over to the iron. We are going to place our interfacing wrong side to wrong side with our fabric for both the case and for the tab. So the wrong side, you can feel the little bubbles and bumps. That's the glue. And you're going to follow manufacturer's instructions. I just hit it with a hot iron, and I've had no trouble at all. I like the weight of the SPF 101. After I iron it, I like to turn over and press on this side of the fabric. I think it really helps that glue to adhere because you're closer to the glue from this side of the fabric. Here I have a piece of already interfaced and a tab that I have also interfaced. While I was at the iron, I turned lengthwise, right sides together, and gave a memory crease down the center, and then I'll open that up. This is non-directional, so it doesn't matter top or bottom. If you have a directional fabric, your front will stay in the correct direction if this is the top and the part close to you is the bottom. I also interfaced my 2.5-inch square, and then just like you do with bias tape, I fold it in half, hit it with an iron to find the center, and then I brought each of these edges to the center, and I hit it with the iron, and then fold it in half and hit it with the iron again to give me a nice tab. Then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew right along the edge at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And on my Juki, it's the inside of the foot rides right along the edge. I'll sew down this side and down this side. It'll give it a nicer look to have the top stitching on both sides of the tab, but it also will reinforce it. Here I have one that I have already done. It's sewn on both sides, and I'm going to thread it through my swivel clasp like this. It's really handy to have a cutting mat, but you don't need to use a mat. You can use any ruler to find your space. I like to take this and somewhere between 1 and 1.5 inch, so it's about 1 inch from the top on the left side. I like to go a little bit below that. I'm going to line up the raw edges so my swivel clasp is facing to the inside, raw edges on the outside. You can clip it and then go to the sewing machine and edge stitch it along. If you don't have clips, something you could use is a little glue pen, and it could be a fabric pen like this one, or it could be just your regular children's glue pen, and put a little bit on each side of the tab and a little bit where you're going to be applying it. Again, I'm placing it back slightly below that 1 inch marker. Raw edges together. Now I'm going to hit that with a hot dry iron, and that will pin it in place and make it steady. And we'll head over to the sewing machine and sew this down. I tacked this down inside my seam allowance. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to put this together. So this will be hidden, but I went over it several times to give it a little extra strength because there's going to be a lot of stress on this tab. So I'm going to use that memory crease that I made, and I'm going to bring my long sides together, and I'm going to pin this along the long sides. I'm going to be sewing the short ends together along the long sides, and I'm going to leave a 2 inch opening on this long side. The side's folded, this is open. I'm leaving that open so that I can turn it out. I like to leave a 2 inch opening, not too close to the bottom and not too close to the tab, just so that I don't stress and pop those stitches. I'm using a friction pen to mark it just so you can see it here on camera. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew the 3 sides closed, leaving this open. So I'll start with the back tack, or I like to start with my stitch length 0, so it just stitches in place and then moves on and locks in nice and neat. I'm going to pivot at the corner. I'm going to come here. I'm going to back tack, or I could move my stitch length to 0, stitch a few times to secure. Then here, again, start, back tack, go here, pivot, and come around to secure it, and then we're going to turn it out. So let me head to the sewing machine, and I'll show you the next step. My cream thread really blends into this well, so I'm not sure that you can see, but I have done a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this is very forgiving. So if you don't quite get a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but you've caught everything and secure, that is good. It's fine. That makes it a great beginner project. I have left this area open, and before I turn it out, I want to clip my corners. So I'm going to come in here and clip, making sure I'm not clipping the stitching lines, my corners, get rid of some of the bulk. And I'm just going to trim away some of this extra. You don't really need to do that, but I'm doing that. I'm going to reach inside here and I'm going to turn this out. I'm going to be a little gentle with it. This is such a quick project. I don't need to pop a stitch trying to race to get it done. Just carefully, gently turn it right side out and poke out the corners. Once it starts coming out, the rest wants to come out. There we go. When I was sewing my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I went over this area several times to give it a little extra reinforcement. So I'm going to pull it out. Then I'm going to find a chopstick or something to help me poke out my corners. I'm just going to slide this in here in my opening. I'm just going to gently poke out my corners. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time poking out these corners, and then I'm going to press it. The opening will naturally want to turn in. So I will pull that. I'm going to roll my sleeves. I'll press it. I can see I need to poke this out a little more, and I'll come back to show you the next step. I'm back from the ironing board. I've got my seam allowance is ironed in. We're going to close this later. I'm going to place this on my board with my tab on the bottom. I'm going to look about 3 inches up from the bottom to fold up my pouch. Maybe a little bit more. Let's go 3.5 inches. Again, this is not super scientific. There we go. I think the chapstick will be fully enclosed there, and I've got plenty of room to turn down my top tab. This is a great size. This gives a little room for error if the grandkids take a little bigger seam allowance in putting this together. This chapstick is still going to fit, and it looks really cute. So I'm coming up 3.5 inches from the bottom, and I'm going to fold the top down. I'm going to leave a little bit of play here in the top. I'm not going to bring the crease all the way to this point here. I'm just going to give myself a little wiggle room. And I'm going to do a dry fit. My bag or pouch or whatever we want to call it is now measuring, when I fold it over, 2 inches by 4 inches. And that makes it really easy to find the middle. So the middle is going to be right here. You can make a dot with a fabric pen, or you can go right in and poke your hole, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to line up the edges so it sits right. It's going to come down. And I want to leave enough room for my cap of my snap so that it's not hitting the edge of my fabric. And I think I'm at a really good point here. So I'm going to go ahead and poke this through. I'll measure it for you. I've done enough of the snaps to be able to have a good guess. But let me measure and tell you how far I came down. I came down 3/8 of an inch, and that'll be the center of my snap. Now, I did learn a lesson. I don't want to attach my cam snap now and then top stitch, or it's going to be really hard to get a neat stitch right here. Let me show you. This is one I sewed where I installed the snaps before I sewed it, and I've got some wonky stitching going on here, and it slowed me down. So I don't think that's going to save time, and it's not going to make you have a good product, but I am going to put this one in before I sew it up. I think it'll make it much easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again go back. I've made my hole, and you might have noticed that when I put this all in, I gave it a little bit of a wiggle to exaggerate the hole. That's not going to close up on me while I'm doing other things. So I'm going to fold it over again. I think I want this top to not interfere with the side tab, so I'm going to bring it up a little bit. That still gives me plenty of room for this, and in all the ones I've made so far, I've never had the chapstick fall out. And so here I'm going to take my pen and just make a dot through the hole so that I know where to go in with my stud. I'm going to make the hole. I do have a video on my channel about using the cam snaps. You can take a look at that if you've never used it before. If you don't have one of these tools, you can use Velcro and sew that to these sides, and that definitely is something that you could do before sewing it together. But I'm going to attach my cam snap to this bottom piece. I like to put the male on the side that's going to go down. So what you do is you take your cap and you put it through this hole you've made. Poke it through. And I've got my male end. This is a size 20 plastic cam snap. And I'm going to attach this now where I can easily get into this. I'm putting the round cap into this black piece. And then I'm just going to squeeze. If you hear a crack, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't hear anything. All you're trying to do is to crush that middle prong so that it works as a snap. I will be adjusting the female end later. I'll be putting that in. And I'll show you that after I get it sewn up. So I'm going to just double checking that I am keeping my crease where I want it. I'm to about 3.5. That's going to be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this. In this process, we're going to be sewing that open and close and adding a nice top stitch detail. You may want to lengthen your stitch length to 3. As a top stitch, you're going through a couple of layers. 2.5, just use whatever your machine likes. And I'm going to stitch this down. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to go across the bottom. I'm going to come up the side. I'm going to go all the way around here and secure it. I'm going to start off with the back stitch and end with the back tack. This will reinforce these edges and it'll give it a really nice look. I'm going to use the inside edge of my presser foot to get that 1/8 inch seam allowance on this. A 1/4 inch seam allowance is fine. A scant 1/4 inch is fine. This is not something that has to be super exact. There's plenty of room for your chapstick. I stitch all the way around my bag. I did go over this edge where I'm closing this a couple of stitches back and forth to secure it because it's going to be open and closed and in regular use. So I'm going to put in my female cap. And let's see, I want the cap side on the outside and the female end on the inside of the flap because it's going to be connecting here with the male side and making the closure. So I've got that on. I'm resting the cap into the black divot, pressing, and let's give it a test. There we go. Now, if you ever have one of these cam snaps crush, or you need to remove it and have a do-over, I do have a tutorial on how to do that easily with no special equipment, and I'll link that down below as well. So I've got my chapstick. I can put it inside my little pouch. Now there's extra room here. You can see there's extra room, but that gives you the option of having different sizes, or if the chapstick goes in diagonally, it just fits really nicely. Clip it close, and there we go, a chapstick holder. This is a gift I think anyone would like to receive.